Welcome back. My name is Rachel,
And Sophia.
and we are your hosts for Let's Talk Racism, the show that sends a message to youth about racism and cultural diversity. As many of you know, racism has been a big issue all around the world. Furthermore, while anxiety and fear about the ongoing pandemic have been widespread, Asian-focused racist incidents and Black Lives Matter protests have constantly been happening throughout the year.
Our guest today is Kamika Williams. She's a financial officer at BC Public Service and former chair of Anti-Racism Coalition Vancouver, the creators of Black Shirt Day BC Initiative. Hi, Kamika. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here speaking with you today.
Yes, so we're just going to jump right into it. So could you tell us why diversity is so important to you, and how is diversity necessary to make a change and move forward in our society?
Yeah, it's really important to me as somebody who, I grew up in a very predominantly white town. There was not a lot of diversity. So having a lack of diversity, it's deeply affected my life. So that's why it's important to me on a personal level. And just in general, the lack of diversity and representation of certain groups means that people from those groups aren't normalized. We often turn to media for information, and different groups are portrayed differently. And for example, we often see Black people on TV playing criminals or drug dealers or drug addicts. And it causes negative stereotypes to be reflected onto Black people as well as different groups, but that particular stereotype. And if you only see, Black people on TV getting arrested, then you think that all Black people are criminals by nature. It's propaganda, and it's really important that, we are exposed to other ethnicities and cultures from a very young age. So we understand that the differences on the outside are not a reflection of what we see on the inside. And then Black and racialized people need to know that we are the same as everyone else, that our skin will not be a deterrent or a limitation to what we can achieve. And we need to see people who look like us in positions and regular everyday positions so that, again, we're normalized.
I think that's very important. But so why do you think it's important to have this conversation about diversity?
Yeah, it's important just in general to talk about things and acknowledge their existence. If you're not talking about diversity, you're not actually acknowledging it. And it's like saying, I don't see color. And from my perspective, I want you to see my color. I want you to acknowledge who I am and how I'm unique and the specific issues that I must deal with in my personal life. It's important to feel a sense of belonging within our communities, within our schools, and in our classrooms, and especially in the history that we learn about people who look like us, so that we feel a sense of pride in being diverse.
Yeah. Right. So how do you think adults can have meaningful conversations with students, or really vice versa?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the biggest piece of advice, would be to not afraid to start the conversation. It's like the sex of the birds and the bees talk, right? It may be very uncomfortable for both parties, adults and children, but it's necessary to have. I also think it's important, to truly listen. No gaslighting, no undermining people's experiences. And I believe that's why it's important for youth to, have mentors, teachers who look like them, so that they are more comfortable having that conversation and that the adults that they're turning to truly understand. And I find it's really difficult for people who don't look like you to relate to your experiences. And it leads to a lack of acknowledgement and validation of your experiences, which can actually really be hurtful. And especially for youth, it's traumatizing. And when our brains are growing and when we're just learning, it carries on into adulthood. Having people who, can relate to you allows you to open up and to share your feelings. And it's very important for youth to have that outlet to express themselves.
Yeah, I don't think many people can talk to adults about these kind of issues because it isn't very common, which is kind of sad. But now I think schools are more open to it now. And we also have social justice classes now, which is really great because they can learn about racism in our school and learn what's wrong and what's right and what we can do to help out.
That's amazing to hear that you have social justice classes.
Yeah.
That's great.
Do you mind sharing your own experiences with racism?
Yeah, certainly. So I actually experienced racism at a very young age. So, like I was explaining, I grew up in Victoria, BC, a very small, predominantly white town. There was not a lot of diversity, especially, in the 80s and 90s. There's still not now, but there is more, I think, just with, the world globalization. We are seeing more diversity just in general. But, I was one of the only Black kids in my school. And for many years, I was often, the only Black kid in my class. And I experienced racism at a very young age. At 5 years old, I actually came home crying because one of my classmates said that I looked like poo. I was called a monkey in elementary school, like grade 6 and 7, almost every single day. When I was 10 years old, I was on the ferry with my father and my brother. An adult male came up to us and said, that called us spooks.
What?
Yeah. These things that you don't forget. I had an ex-boyfriend who, told me that my hair looked like pubic hair. Those are very specific, but just in general, I've been called the N-word. I've been labeled as angry. And I also think it's important to acknowledge intersectionality.
Right.
As well. So people, have this opinion of racism, like it's just the N-word or it's just police violence. But, I have a unique experience as a Black woman. So, I've had, my opinions dismissed in group settings and thinking work and university where it's like predominantly white males. And I'm often, dismissed, before even a white woman is dismissed, right? So there's that as well. I've gotten in trouble for things that, in elementary school that white girls my age didn't get in trouble for and being, blamed and scapegoated. I've been labeled angry by white women, right? And I've been over sexualized and fetishized by white males and have watched them, treat white women with more respect and dignity than me. And I've also, experienced that from Black males as well, like in group settings, dismissing what I'm saying and paying more attention to, white males or white people. So I think that intersectionality piece is very important, but, I have experienced racism from a very young age and from many different, facets.
Mhm. Same. I also sort of experienced racism when I was younger, since I've said this before in the past, but I got put into ESL because I looked like I couldn't speak English when I actually could, since I was born in Vancouver. Luckily, I didn't think much of it. I was just like, oh, I'm in ESL. Oh, I'm not in it anymore. But like, I can see how it can traumatize some people, and like some people aren't as lucky as I am, since I was just fine with it. But I can't imagine how you felt at that age, like being called all those negative words.
Yeah, it's sometimes you you internalize it sometimes and you sometimes get that attitude like I am what you say I am. And so you start, being what people think you are. So if people project that criminal stereotype on you, sometimes you start acting out and you're like, well, if you're just going to treat me like a criminal, I'll be one.
Yeah, I think those stereotypes should just end now, because, you know, Black people are not criminals, they're people. So, could you explain what performance activism means for those who don't know, and why you believe it's important to stay away from it?
Yeah, performance activism, I guess my definition of it is just doing something for attention and when there's nothing meaningful action behind it. So, we often see with the Black Lives Matter movement, people with their signs and being out there with their pictures taken. Personally, I don't like performance activism, and I urge anyone and everyone to stay away from it. And I believe it does more harm than good. It validates the naysayers, right? So it just kind of washes away the fact that there is a problem. And spreading awareness is fine, but what real changes are you planning on making? And I think that protests are great, but if there are no action steps, no tangible plans to change systems of oppression, like education, healthcare, police violence, you aren't really changing anything. Spreading awareness is great, especially as a starting point, but a real plan is required to make change. I actually did a news interview recently, and the journalist had asked me for pictures at protests and events working with ARC, and I actually didn't have any. In the 8 months that I was with ARC, I have 2 photos of myself at events that one of our members had taken. And without those 2 images, you wouldn't even have known that I was there, because I have never thought to invite a professional photographer to a protest or any volunteer event that I have done. I'm someone who has been deeply affected by racism my entire life. And I actually take it personal when I see people doing performative acts to promote themselves and then just disappear from social justice work and move on with their lives as if the events of last summer, like George Floyd and Breonna Taylor being murdered, were just events and not a movement. And I think that it's crucial to build some movements around Black Shirt Day, because it's not just about a shirt. And, a lot of people are saying that. It's about acknowledging the lack of, Black history in Canadian schools, which in itself is a form of systemic racism brought on from acts of white supremacy. So I think it's really important that, we stay away from the performative acts and that we do real meaningful work to make change.
That's great. And you just mentioned that you and the rest of ARC Vancouver created Black Shirt Day. So could you talk more about what inspired you guys to do it?
Yeah, absolutely. So the inspiration at its crux was, The lack of Black history that is being taught and has been taught, and especially the false narratives that we often find in education. For example, things like Indigenous people willingly giving up their land and renaming the slave trade the Atlantic Triangle trade. So that's what they've done in I believe, Southern United States, basically whitewashing history. So that was important that was basically the inspiration around Black Shirt Day. My own personal experiences, other members' personal experiences with the lack of Black representation in education. And as well, Orange Shirt Day and Pink Shirt Day have done such a great job on informing people, particularly youth, on extremely sensitive topics. And we thought that having a Black Shirt Day would be a great way to have important conversations about racism and civil rights with children, just centered around a t-shirt, but it's a great way to open that conversation and open the door to that.
Yeah, I think that, Pink Shirt Day and Orange Shirt Day, they've been so huge among the schools now. And now, Black Shirt Day was brought to like the school district. And I think like in the future now, more schools will participate, and hopefully it'll be like a worldwide thing now to spread even more awareness to younger children.
For sure, that's really the goal, to make it an international movement.
Mm-hmm.
So that's definitely the goal.
Yeah, so like adding on to what Rachel said, you like made a huge impact by creating this project, and like so many schools did participate in it, including like our school from Burnaby North. So like you all thought it would be a great way to promote Black history in schools and get more conversations started about racism as well as civil rights. So now it is becoming a reality. Like, how does that make you feel that you've become a part of this cause, like as a creator of Black Shirt Day?
It honestly, it feels amazing. I've actually cried many times in happy tears, but knowing that we've actually made an impact, that this idea, that we had to spread awareness actually worked, and that people are acknowledging the lack of Black history in schools. It's almost indescribable. Sometimes I still can't believe it, and that's why I really encourage youth and everyone to stand up and do whatever they can to make a difference, because no act is too small. It really could be the catalyst to some major change, some major event. And all of our heroes and our great leaders started out the same way we did. Just everyday people who wanted to fight for a great cause, and they take a leap of faith and never stop trying. So it's just such an overwhelming, amazing feeling, and just further proof that this work is important and it's necessary.
Yeah, I think that's really wonderful, because like I understand what you're saying by we should like be a part of the change and like make little steps to like make a positive change in our community. That's also why I was like, oh, maybe we should start a podcast to spread more awareness on social media for like youths to like hear about different people's like experiences and their thoughts and their views. So it's great that like people are taking little steps to make a difference in our community. And that's why Rachel and I thought by creating this organization and like making those social media posts, so that like nowadays, because of the pandemic especially, a lot of youths like go on Instagram or Facebook, like on their social media platforms to find news and like information. Yeah, so I'm just really happy that like we're making some kind of difference. I don't know if it's like a big difference, but we're just trying our best as high school students to like spread awareness. And I think that's really important for us to like recognize it and also take action to it. Right. Yeah.
It is. And honestly, I'm so proud of you guys. I think it's amazing. It's something. It's more than I did at your age, right? Honestly, and social media is such a powerful tool, really. Mm-hmm. And you spread a lot of awareness. So you guys are really helping. And I think you guys are doing great work, and it's really encouraging to see that you're so young and getting involved. And I hope you're encouraged to continue this work, through adulthood. So it's amazing to see.
Thank you.
Yeah. So like, how important is it to you that youth can learn more about Black Canadians, and why do you think it hasn't been taught about yet?
The second part of that question is a very great and probably deep question, I think, but it's important in general for people to understand their history, where they come from, just so they know themselves and feel a sense of belonging. If we're not being taught Black history, we're actually missing out on a huge chunk of Canadian history. So it's all of our history, right? Mm-hmm. And that's something that I've been saying. Black history is Canadian history. Black History Month is every month. Mm-hmm. And I feel like, I know that I felt that a piece of me was missing due to the lack of education. Right. And I think that having representation in our education system It will help avoid the trauma and the stigma that many Black and racialized youth feel when dealing with the lack of representation on a daily basis in schools, especially in Canadian history. It's really important for youth to see people who look like them in history and in different careers. Again, I had touched on that before, so that we understand there's no limits to our potential. And I think that, it's not mandatory or being taught on a regular basis because of white supremacy. The people who created the rules ensured that it unfairly benefited them and only them. And this racial kind of hierarchy was created to divide us while the dominant group remains in power. And maintaining this narrative of, white people were more civilized, that they were saviors of all humanity, that their way is the best way, that they've made more accomplishments, is a form of white supremacy. It tricks people into believing this false narrative. And when people are reading information, incredible textbooks, and scientists and doctors and scholars are telling you that by nature white people are the superior race, that Black people are closer to apes than humans, why would you question that? Like, again, thinking it's the 1700s, 1800s, and doctors and scientists are releasing this data, this fact-based data that white people are superior. Of course you believe in science, right? So I think that's why Black history isn't being taught. White supremacy, for sure.
Right. Oh, I see. So do you know if anyone's working with the Ministry of Education to include it as part of the curriculum by any chance? Or
Yeah, and then that's part of the reason why, we started the Black Shirt Day initiative, is because a lot of groups had already been, in talks with the minister for years, decades, and not a lot was happening. So groups like BC Community Alliance and BC Black History Awareness Society have been talking with the Minister of Education. And as well, it's important to acknowledge that there was an election recently, so the ministers have changed. So that often delays things, taking portfolios and switching them over. Think about when you quit your job and start new, you have to take over that person's work and kind of relearn that. So that's kind of been a wrench in the plans. But I've also heard that, unfortunately, it seems like they're moving away from Black history as well. I believe, as of a couple of weeks ago, I'm no longer with ARC Vancouver, but we were, at that time when I was with them, we were invited to a meeting with the minister. So I do believe that ARC Vancouver will be meeting with them, or has met with them. I actually might have the opportunity to meet with the Minister of Education next week. And I will actually have a meeting today with one of the ministers with the Department of Canadian Heritage in the federal government to talk about Black Shirt Day. So I know that there's a lot of groups who have been speaking with ministers, either education or dealing with youth or Canadian heritage, trying to get Black history involved. So, fingers crossed that collectively, if we're all kind of standing in solidarity and kind of hitting them all from different sides, that will push the needle a little further.
Oh, wow. Okay, I see. Thank you. So finally, what message are you trying to send to everyone?
Yeah, I think that the biggest message is, well, first of all, obviously that the importance of education, that's really important, and what we learn, when we're younger, we really carry that with us. And obviously, like I just touched on, the information that we believe, the information that we're told in school. So it's really important to have the truth in education. Another message that I want to send is that racism exists. It's unfortunate, but it's alive and well, and that. Right, and that racism and white supremacy isn't a myth. It doesn't matter what you hear on the news, what you hear from certain groups. It's real, and the rules were created by white supremacists. For example, the founding fathers of America, they were slave owners. The Constitution wasn't created to include everyone. It was made to advance and support straight, white, able-bodied males. And a lot of the rules that govern our lives were created for that specific group. And the people who created the rules ensured that it unfairly benefited them and only them. And there's so much divisiveness. I don't want to get too far into it, but there's a racial hierarchy, right? Black people are looked at as criminals, Asian people, the model myth minority, right? And this hierarchy was created to divide us while the dominant group remains in power. And we need to acknowledge the struggles of all oppressed groups, build solidarity amongst all communities, and in turn we'll get support as well. And just the big message, we need to fight the system and not each other. That's the most important thing. And we need to use the privileges that we're given to, support other groups and really make change and fight white supremacy.
Mm-hmm. Hopefully those opinions will start changing and everyone just starts to help each other out.
I also want to note, as you've mentioned earlier, Kamika, how you said history back then, like the Constitution, it was all built based on like the division between like the white males. Like they're prioritizing the white males over like the blacks. And I think like when I was learning the history, like even AP US history as well, like I noticed that black people, they were already like being slaves, like they were enslaved before. And then yeah, because our history is like founded on like already, it was already on with like the division, I think we should like make a change and people should acknowledge that. Yeah. So thank you so much for coming to the podcast today. We have had such a great time with you, just talking about the importance of diversity, Black Shirt Day, and what we can do to hopefully one day end racism. Kamika, do you have anything else you would like to say? Like your final words, maybe?
No, just, again, it's great to see, the younger generation really start to make change. You're doing much more than a lot of people my age were doing in our time, and it's really great. And thank you so much for, having me on your podcast, and keep up the great work, keep spreading awareness, and thank you for doing this work.
Thank you so much for those kind words. And thank you to everyone who has stayed tuned into the end of the podcast, and also stay tuned for next week's episode, since we also have another guest speaker sharing their thoughts and opinions on racism. And as always, let's keep the conversation going. Thank you.
Thank you so much.